Hello, we are going to talk to you about jazz. And no, it's not what you're thinking. We don't mean the jazz from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
What many young people wanted to do was dance. The Charleston, the Cakewalk, the Black Bottom, the Flea Hop. Jazz bands played at dance halls like the Savoy in New York City and the Aragon in Chicago. Radio stations and phonograph records carried their tunes to listeners across the nation. Some older people objected to jazz music's vulgarity and depravity, but many in the younger generation loved the freedom they felt on the dance floor.
Following World War I, large numbers of jazz musicians migrated from New Orleans to major northern cities such as Chicago and New York, leading to a wider dispersal of jazz as different styles in different cities. In the 1920s progressed, jazz rose into popularity and helped to generate a cultural shift. Because of its popularity in speakeasies, which were illegal nightclubs where alcohol was sold during Prohibition, and its proliferation due to the emergence of more advanced recording devices, jazz became very popular in a short amount of time, with stars like Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, and Chick Webb. Several famous entertainment venues, such as the Apollo Theater and the Cotton Club, came to epitomize the jazz age.
African American jazz was played more frequently on urban radio stations than on their suburban counterparts. Young people of the 1920s were influenced by jazz to rebel against the traditional culture of previous generations, a rebellion that went hand in hand with fads such as the bold fashion statements of the flappers and new radio concerts.
Dances such as the Charleston, developed by African Americans, instantly became popular among different demographics, including among young white people. That's a shocker. Within the introduction of large-scale radio broadcasts in 1922, Americans were able to experience different styles of music without physically visiting a jazz club. Through its broadcasting concerts, the radio provided Americans with a trendy new avenue for exploring unfamiliar cultural experiences from the comfort of their living rooms. The most popular type of radio show was a Potter Palm, an amateur concert and big band jazz performance broadcast from New York and Chicago.
In 1925, the jazz age was in full swing. It was the year Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington made their first recordings. The Phantom of the Opera opened at movie theaters. The Ku Klux Klan marched on Washington, D.C. People sat on flagpoles, danced the Charleston, read a new novel called The Great Gatsby, and a young man named John Scopes went on trial for teaching Darwin's theory of evolution in defiance of the Tennessee law.
The Scopes trial was a signature event of the jazz age. It had that ballyhoo spirit of typical of the 1920s. In one way, however, it was atypical. The Scope trials took place in a little town in the South, far from the roar of the metropolis.
The jazz age glorified city life. Americans, including many African American sharecroppers from the South, were leaving their farms in record numbers to live and work in places like Chicago and New York City. F. Scott Fitzgerald called it a time when the parties were bigger, the pace was faster, the buildings were higher, the morals looser.
Definitions of the 1920s reflect the extreme nature of the era itself. Playwright Elmer Davis said, "Today Croesus is king. Not thinkers, but rich men rule the world." Looking back on the 20s, Kevin Rayburn wrote, "It was the first truly modern decade, and for better or worse, it created the model for society that all the world follows today."
The 20s, in all its light-hearted excess, grew from a great darkness. No one who survived what was then known as the Great War could imagine that anything like this cataclysm would happen again. The war opened eyes to unimagined horrors, and when it was over, people simply wanted to live again. Those who could afford it lived with a vengeance.
It was the best to be young during the Roaring Twenties. Many people born in the 19th century felt threatened by a culture that seemed to have lost its moral compass. William Jennings Bryan, a political and religious leader of the day, had campaigned hard for Prohibition, and in 1919 it became the law of the land. But the law meant nothing to a wild new generation. Surveys showed that young people were losing their faith in God. In his attempt to bring America back to the Bible, Bryan chose to attack a single idea, Darwin's theory of evolution.
Not everyone saw the problem in such a simple light. Writer Willa Cather said that for her, the world broke in two around 1922. Like Bryan, Cather had grown up in a less frantic America. Before the automobile, the talking pictures, and the phonograph, Cather thought the modern world was an uglier place than the one she remembered in 1921. She said in a speech, "We now have music by machines. We travel by machines. Soon we will be having machines to do our thinking."
Skynet. Iconoclast H.L. Mencken turned 45 the year of the Scopes trial, yet he, more than anyone else, epitomized the era. In the words of Haywood Brown, the jazz age was wicked and monstrous and silly. Unfortunately, I had a good time.